So thank you all for coming to our third of four lectures on Art of Architecture in our fall lecture series. My name is Daniel Serraldo with Miami Design Preservation League, and this is a special lecture because we're up in North Beach. A lot of our members live in North Beach, and they were saying, why are all our events in South Beach? No offense to the South Beachers here. But we're really happy that the city gave us this space for the presentation. This is a North Shore Youth Center, and it is a city-owned building and a great resource right in the heart of the town center. So I wanted to also mention, if you're not a member, please join MDPL, mdpl.org. And we have in our audience Nina Weber-Worth, our vice chair. We have Sarah Ledick, our programs and Art Deco weekend chair. And we have many members and illustrious guests. So we're happy to have you here. And also Jamie Straz, who is our featured speaker today. He was previously on the board of Miami Design Preservation League, and thank you for your service. He was placed as a representative for the city of Miami Beach to the MDPL board several years back, so we got to work together with him. He's a local architect born in 1987. Wow, make me feel old, you know. He's an artist and designer who lives in Miami Beach with his wife and children, and he holds a Bachelor in Architecture from the University of Miami and is a principal architect founder of the architecture firm Studio 3, which has been involved in architecture, interior design, and urban planning throughout South Florida. And we also have worked with Jamie on the International Inn and other North Beach MIMO initiatives. So it's really great to have a local architect here, and please join me in welcoming Jamie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Daniel, for the kind introduction. Thank you, MDPL, for inviting me to speak. As Daniel said, my name is Jamie Straz. As we were telling you, my office is literally down the street, and I live right around the corner. I live on Normandy Drive, right across Fairway Park. So if you ever need anything, you can knock on my door. I don't mind. So what we're going to talk about is, like Daniel was mentioning, was the art of architecture. However, that being said, what I really want to speak about is what I find to be my perspective is coming from an artist background and then being trained in architecture and then practicing both to this day, doing architectural projects and working on art as well. And one thing I was realizing when Daniel mentioned the theme of the lecture series was there's a lot of overlap between the two worlds, obviously. And I think you might think the common explanation would be, how does the art, the design aspects, those things fit into architecture? Where for me, what I really found is the key to a successful art project or an architecture project is a process. And if you don't have something in place and you have to figure out what works for you, and what I'm going to talk about what works for me, because what I think is really important is a good exercise is to learn, and hopefully from this you'll hear how I do my process, and it maybe will inspire you to help in your daily life, and I think it's applicable in almost any trade, any hobby, any profession, whatever it is, or even just daily interactions. But having a process in your daily life is going to be very, very helpful in your artistic endeavors and architectural endeavors, and they very overlap from there. So one of the things when I started my studio that I really wanted to make sure was that we kind of had like a north arrow, a vision of where we want to have all of our projects focused. So that's where we came up with this, was that we're going to look at the past and the future and then create a meaningful present. And it seems a little kind of esoteric and maybe like, you know, you could talk and add in whatever you want to it. But the way I look at it is really the three things of past, future, present. So it's about a process. So this slide is literally, I mean, as dumb as this little squiggle is, this is essentially boiled down into how a project becomes to life. You start with the initial concept of an idea that'll end up with a bit of a straight line or a plan or whatever that end goal is for you. But the first thing that I find that you have to do in any project, and this is kind of the overall of the steps, and then I'll give you into examples of what does past mean, what does future mean. I'll show you some architectural examples, I'll show you some art examples, and I'll show you how to kind of put them all together. And then some work examples of mine, and we can go from there, and we'll have hopefully a nice conversation after as well. But whenever you get a project or a design, or you have an idea in your head that you want to get out, the research is the first thing that I always find as the biggest key. And that could be from a work experience. If you have code issues, if you have a homeowner's programming requirement, or somebody had a violation you need to fix, there's rules and regulations that have to be applied which are going to affect the design of a project. As well as is looking at the context. And context can mean various different things, but in let's say an architectural setting, it would be in the urban environment. What's surrounding this property? What kind of styles are found nearby? What's the lifestyle of this area? What's the urban environment? All of those kind of things affect the project from there, as well as from a design element. What type of style am I going for? What's a homeowner or client's desire? And all of those things have to be taken into account to inform the project. And then the next thing is, it's called a partie. And a partie is really something they drive home in architectural school, is the core idea boiled down to its pure root form. And you keep that as, no matter where you are in the project, you can reference back to that. And am I staying to the core idea? Now, it could have been in the original development of this would be, okay, do I have a symmetrical plan? The idea is everything's going to be perfectly symmetrical, so I must always fall back on that and ensure that that gets through the whole way through. But it's developed into an idea of that, what is my core idea of this project? And it's also very helpful, again, this is something that is applicable throughout life in every step. And if you can focus whatever idea or anything you have and boil it down to the core element, you don't lose the vision as you develop, because it's very easy once you start applying all this together in the next step, which is development, going back to your research, adding all of that in and informing a smart partie and a smart design. That's where it all comes together. And then you have the execution, and that could be various different things. If it's art, it's actually making the painting. It's making the drawing. In architecture, preparing the plans to develop it, or the actual construction, where things in middle construction come up and you have to make changes. And if you skipped any of these steps, and let's say you're all the way at the end, and you're in the middle of construction, and a problem comes up, and, well, there's 2 options, or 3 options, what do we do? Well, you have what to fall back on, and hopefully the answer is going to be self-evident. Obviously, there might be other concerns, money, time, there's various life factors from there, but making sure that you followed your process, it'll be very easy to inform yourself, no matter where you are in the timeline, what should be the correct answer. And when you skip any of these steps, and you'll see in some examples later on, you can feel the lacking a little bit, and you can tell when it seems like you skipped a step. And this is really talking to me personally. I find it happens to me all the time, where I get into usually somewhere in design and sketching, and I just cannot figure something out, and it gets really frustrating, a little bit writer's block. And you go back and you realize, oh, I missed one of my steps of my process. And that's so dumb of me. Like, whatever it is, like, oh, that's something I learned back in middle school. I know, don't skip this one specific step before you go to that one from there. And I'm looking back on it like, oh, silly me. I skipped that. But if I stick to it, I can always go back and develop it from there. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of what does it mean past. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of past in, I think, successful manners. My favorite architect is Moshe Straz. One of his projects, and these are my go-to golden examples, okay? And by the way, I'm making my own opinion about this. I've never spoken to the architects. I don't know if this is their true intentions or not. This is how I view it and how it speaks to me, these projects. So here you see his idea boiled down at the core element. This project was 1995, and what you might think, what's interesting is you'll see this develop throughout. But also you might think like, oh, it's like a coral or a seashell or some organic element from there. However, when you look at the past, which I think he did because it's very self-evident in this project. So if we take the Colosseum, for example, and there's different ways of applying the past to where you are now. Meaning you can, if you're following, let's say, a classical order, I'm trying to use like what the strongest, most clearest examples are. So if you go for like the classical orders of architecture, there's rules you must follow or you do not fit that definition. You know, there's the top of the columns and the heights and the spacing and everything has a very clear rhythm they're set in rules. You have to follow them to meet that order of architecture. And learning those rules in order to depart from it is a very hard skill. And it's one way of not losing what was, translating to the future, and in my opinion, it's a very beautiful creation of something timeless. And this is what he developed from there. And it's really, in my opinion, it's very self-evident. And again, I never spoke to him. If this was his intention, was that his true inspiration for the project? I don't know. Hopefully I can talk to him one day and we'll find out from there. But to me, it was always one of my great examples that I love of, here's a great example of somebody looking to the past, reinterpreting it for now, while I do believe, it's a timeless design that, just how people would love the Colosseum and all of that, this is also a timeless design for this city. And it takes the rules and it interprets it in either the new language, new technology, what's fitting for this urban environment, and so forth. My other go-to example is the Sainsbury Wing at the National Gallery in London. So the National Gallery of London is a bit of, I don't know the right word, like a growing living organism. There's additions after additions after additions after additions after additions. This edition was in the late 80s, and Venturi Scott Brown, a husband-wife duo, they're famous for their book, Learning from Las Vegas, which took those marketing, graphic designs, bold elements, and then merging for seemingly the first time in a very architectural sense, those worlds into architecture. And this one's always a great, interesting example for me because this goes into a little bit on the context. Because here we're not talking about something isolated. So this is the main part of the museum. Again, it's a very obvious example of a very classical, symmetrical. There are rules here that must be followed in order to meet this architectural definition. And their addition on the side, which really, like this is, and I'll show you overall, but like, for example, they took the language that was in the existing building with the type of columns and the spacing and redid it in a way that is completely inappropriate for the rules of that classical order. You would never just squish together a bunch of columns together for no reason. But when they're put together hand in hand, it kind of, and you'll see on the next slide, but I want to show you this for 1 second, it gives a beautiful transition, but depending on where you're looking at it, it can feel modern, it can feel like it was part of the original building, depending on the angle, and it gives a lot of life and character to this building that they, again, learned from the past, applied future either design, technology, and whatnot. And this one's a little bit of an easy example that, from a historic point of view, that people will do is, well, I'll just do glass to not, be too against the other building. But in this case, what's really nice is you have the reflection of the other building onto the glass. A little hard to see here. I couldn't find a very great example from a photograph, but it really shows beautifully how they play with each other. So, because here you can see that transition as it takes the classical order that was coming from the main building and it just kind of slowly dissipates, not completely into a language unknown to what is found there, but into a little bit more of a cleaned up architectural element and expression there. But symbiotically all together, it works together. And I think if, there are plenty of other architects, and we'll get to one example later on where applying the future, in my opinion, can go wrong without looking at past. But to me, I find this as a wonderful, beautiful example. And those are one of my those are my two favorite, like, just classic examples when people ask me, well, what does it mean you're going to look at the past? So an example of future only, and again, I've never spoken to Frank about this, but this is his residence in 1978. Frank Gehry had an existing house. This is one of the drawing elevations. This is an example it's groundbreaking, it's very forward-thinking. I'm not making a comment necessarily on is this good or bad design, because that is, everybody's up for their own interpretation, but where the point I'm trying to drive home is when you look only in one direction forward without any reference in past, and again, when I'm saying past, like I'm saying, it doesn't mean copying what was already done. It's being informed of whatever those previous lessons, how were those steps that we got to where we are today? What technology did we learn from step to step to step? And again, don't sue me for slander, Frank, but one thing that we hear a lot in some of his buildings, there's a lot of leaks. We've been spending thousands of years as people trying to protect ourselves from shelter, from the natural elements with shelter. So there's kind of a reason why a roof in different climates look different ways, and they have developed over thousands of years in those areas for certain things. And if you throw out, and in that case, let's just call it science, not design, and throw everything out the window, and these are things that are important and have to be done and studied to push forward design, push forward concepts, but that's where opportunities like this could happen. Okay, you're having these weird elements meet. Well, maybe it's just a technological issue. Maybe technology hasn't gotten there yet that we've really figured out how to waterproof a blob and a blob together. Maybe we'll get there, and that turns out is the best, most optimum, and this is the best design for a house, with technology and where we're leading. Maybe Frank had a wonderful vision that, hundreds of years from now, that this is actually 100% correct. We don't know yet. But it's going through our process and informing our design. So one example, I did this wrong. I was going to put this up without the name of who the artist is underneath. On the right, you would know if I told you that's a Picasso, and you would probably be able to answer that without me telling you that. On the left, unless you actually have studied all of Picasso's work, you might not think to say Picasso if I did this correctly and covered it up. But now this is not true for every artist. But most people, when they walk into museums, the common thing everyone says is, well, I could do that. Why am I not a millionaire? Give me a crown, I can scribble on a piece of paper, and I can do that. And it's true, you can do that, 100%. But again, it's going through the process, being trained in the classical ways and learning, and this is going to be one of the key words and the elements when we wrap this up, is learning, is going through the process, learning how to do it, to know how to depart. Because once you start to innovate, if you don't have what to stand on, it's scary. It's not impossible. Not that it can't be done, but then you're kind of limiting yourself to the generational talents, the one in a gazillion of a person. And it's not impossible, but these things are possible. But I'm talking for us, the regular folk, of how to do it. And it's important, again, is the process, which is, in this case, education, training, knowing what the rules are to be able to depart from them. And that's where the secret sauce to creativity comes from. At the same time, don't be afraid of technology. We have been using modern technology throughout time, and this is my favorite example, and it's a scientific phenomenon called the camera obscura, and it's been documented back to caveman era of using this element either as a drawing aid or whatnot, and it's just the idea is taking natural light, it gets inverted in, and you get like a reflection on another surface through a pinhole, and it gives you a reflection, so kind of like a very early form of a camera. And this one was 1858, which I thought was interesting to find this example of somebody documenting a landscape by using this technology. And if it was today and somebody took out their iPhone and took a picture and said, hey, this is art, you would probably say, like most people, well, that's cheating, that's not real art. And that's the key, is it doesn't matter, in my opinion, what the tool is and how you do it. But what matters is the thought, the process, the steps up to it. And that will give the meaning into whatever the end piece is. Because if it's not, you will see, hey, this feels a little bland, a little just not, something's missing, whatever that secret element is, the meaning's gone. So don't be afraid of technology, but use it correctly. So here's a little bit, another example. So it actually got developed into a camera lucida, which is an actual drawing apparatus, developed later in the 1800s. And this is just an example, I don't know why I tried to zoom in, but it got really blurry, but of a very, very long landscape watercolor, I believe this painting is, by John Ray. And he used this method to document a very, 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 very wide landscape. And what that possibly could also have helped is, well, if you're working on a landscape, especially over a large scale, you only have so much time before light changes, and then all your colors are gone, and you might have to sit multiple seatings over different days to accomplish that. You know, this is something that could aid the artist in speeding up his time and maybe even capturing it all at once and capturing that essence of that moment. But again, it could be used in a very bland way, or if it's inspiring and you're using it as a tool to develop your idea, that's the key element there. Now, how does that apply? That's art, but how does that apply in architecture? Kind of three basic eras that we've been in. The hand drafting, which has kind of been around since beginning of time, as long as we could draw. And then developed into AutoCAD, which would be like in CAD, computer-assisted drawings that are a 2D element. And what has happened, what's very interesting, at every change of these technology eras is there's like a transition period where people are trying to figure out how to use the software, and it's a limitation. So, for example, if by hand I could maybe draw very quickly some organic elements, well, once I get to a computer system that has especially an early version, well, okay, straight line, angle, there's only so many options to pick from. I can't really recreate what I could do by hand. Then, fast forward again, Autodesk Revit, which became more popular in the late 2000s, early 2010s, more commonly used in architecture, is a 3D version. Not a 3D version of AutoCAD, it's smarter than just that, but just boiled down to its essence. It's a 3D drafting software, but it's literally building the whole structure inside of a computer. And it's extremely powerful, it's wonderful, but then again, and you'll see in this next slide, if you let the technology define the design, you don't necessarily end up with the best results because of the limitations. And that's one of the keys here. And again, I tried to hide the address. I couldn't figure out how to do it and get this aerial. I don't know if this house was done in Revit. I don't know the architect. This is on 43rd and Sheridan. I almost said Sheridan, mixed Meridian and Sheridan. That's the new. You heard it here first. To me, because I remembered learning Revit as it became popular, I see a lot of the common frustrations I had in getting the computer to do what was in my head coming out in this house. I have no proof that that is the case in this, and I owe the architect a million apologies. But I think it's very interesting because I looked up, the year this was built was 2012, and the timing does work out that it very well could have been a Revit project done, and maybe it was developed some other way or whatever. But to me, it feels like a good example of, again, I don't have proof, but of when you're letting technology, the tool, dictate the design rather than using it as an aid. And then another example of this, of future and looking forward, is so the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED in my opinion, started off as a very good idea. It promotes sustainability. It has gotten codified in most cities, that it's a requirement that you even have to attain this, get a certification from them for that level of building. And there's different levels, silver, gold, platinum, of how many sustainability credits do you meet for the project. And something I've noticed, to be full disclosure, I have not renewed my LEED certificate this past year on purpose, I think it's lost its point. To me, it's been a little bit more of pay for a certificate rather than what's at the true essence. And it highlights, again, going back to past, future, meaningful present. What are some of the examples? And I'm not saying this is a bad program and it needs to be eliminated. It has served and brought a lot of common core elements back to design. But some of the examples are, well, do you have daylighting and windows for a room? Do you have natural fenestration to get for your indoor air quality? You using xeriscaping and native plants that are for the area so you're not wasting on maintenance and overly watering your plants. And I'm like, the more I spent time with this, I go, these are all basic things that you should be doing anyways.
Common sense.
Why pay for this? And I mean, I have honestly yet a need to actually use that letters after my name for anything meaningful. I'm like, why am I paying this every year? I'm not renewing that certification every year. It's a very good idea, but these are all basic things that should have been implemented in. And why did this program have to exist? Well, if you start throwing out past again, you end up with problems like this. Now, this organization helped fix that, and then I think it became a little bit too much of an organization with a capital O over time, but this is an example of when you throw a step of the process out the window, well, something is going to come in naturally, I think, to fill that void to fix it. Okay, so now this is actually not an example. I don't think I'm going to be talking about what you expect I'm going to be talking about. So this is the International Inn, one of my favorite. It's not my favorite project that I've worked on. It's literally, like I tell the owners, it is my baby because of the amount of years of like just working to get this going. And it's really a labor of love. But I'm not here to talk to you about the research that went in, the contextual designs, the additions that we did that you probably don't even see or notice in this, the adding of modern elements to it that still feel appropriate. I'm actually talking to you, this is a rendering, about the people in these slides. Why? To me, that adds the little extra sauce of the meaning to make these renderings not a product that just popped out of a computer but have a little bit of a feeling to it. These people do not exist. They're not models. They're not drawn. These are all AI. And it's one of the things that I've been studying for a while now is how I can apply some of the modern technology into my work nowadays. And besides, I'm able to eliminate secretarial work, basic research that took me even 15 minutes, I can get it immediately, and all those things add up when we have short days. But I'm able now, for one of the first times, and this is one of the most complicated part of finishing any architectural project is the rendering, is getting people that fit the project and the place and that are actually appropriate. Because usually to get that exact right person for that exact neighborhood, you got to pay a lot of money to get model fees, there's people that are dedicated that have cut out people for different areas of the world, and they sell them at very high rates. I'm like, you know what, this is ridiculous. I'm tired of doing this. I'm like, I can put the era, the dress, the exact style, the ethnicity, everything that is perfect for the demographic of the story that I want to get across that subtly fill in the picture. Down to the little Pan Am airplane on top, which is a little hard to see here because it's a little from there. But it's just adding a little bit more to just give that bit of meaning to the piece. Where if I didn't have these people, it would have a little bit, again, more bland of a feeling. But, and I'm going to explain a little bit more with the AI art, you don't take the first thing that pops out of it. So it's using the tools correctly. I'll explain that a little later. Okay, so now we're going to go into the present. So any tool can be used for good. It could also be used for bad. But especially, this is specifically with AI. I've noticed a lot of people who are using it for art purposes. And you can tell when you get the first thing to pop right out of the computer, and that's my art. And I think that's where it fails and it goes wrong. And I'll give an anecdote of a project I was working on where remember I'm an architect, one of the things that clients sometimes request is, hey, I got a specific interior designer, you must work with that one, and we'll either do it ourselves or we work with other people all the time. Very common, very common. And in this project, I've never worked with this specific interior designer before. The other member, I don't want to give too many details so names come out, but the other member of my team were similar age, and we've worked on many projects together. And we had a deadline, and the interior designer missed the deadline, and we were off by a couple weeks. And they told us we were working, we were slammed, we spent so much time, we've been working this entire time, don't think we weren't working. They go in for the presentation, and me and my other colleague walked out, and we just both had that same look on our faces to each other, and we both looked at each other and that was BS, right? And he's like, yeah, we know you spent exactly how long on the product you showed us. Why? We've been through school, we've been through college, we've been through training. We've done that exact scenario when if you don't follow your steps and you try to just cut corners, and I know exactly how long you spent on this. Don't tell me you spent a month when I know you spent less than a week on this, because I know what the product is, and I see this in lots of projects throughout different people and different things also in development. My kid's homework, an art project, you can tell when, hey, this is not fully cooked. And again, that goes back to the process. So one of my favorite things I've been playing with over the past couple of years, besides doing paintings, oils and acrylics and hand drawing and all of that kind of stuff, which I love as well. And also I was getting into drawing digitally as well, and I love it because of my lifestyle and timing. I could take it with me wherever I am and develop instantly big paintings or keep working on projects, not worrying about setup. One of my favorite AI pieces of art that I did, this is how many iterations it took to get to the end product. And if I showed you any one of these, you'd be like, well, that's not that great. You're missing fingers. This looks like AI. There's no meaning. It didn't have a feeling to it. Obviously, I'm not going to say you're going to have a liking to it or a feeling, but to me, and that's all I care about with my art, it has a meaningful expression to me. So this actually took hours of time, not a 1-minute pop-up. I had spent several hours on developing this and developing different areas. And what's beautiful, by the way, about working with AI is the essence is you give a prompt and then it will develop whatever the software is, the output. You give an input and it gives you an output. It's really poetry at the end of the day. Even if you're doing an administrative task or something like that, it's I've never cared so much about what my word choices are, what the phrasing of how I want something to be, even if it's worded weird to get the computer to do what you want, but it's like painting with words almost, which is poetry, and I love it, and it's just so much fun. But that ended up with, this was the final output from there. If you can't tell, I like basketball, and you're going to hear about it again, so pardon me on that. But this was the end product of hours of work, and not just the first thing to come out. And it's always a conversation starter with people. I have this large scale in my office, 4 feet by 4 feet, and it just, I have very fond memories, just looking at it, and I feel like I know these people. And what the best part about AI is for me, as an artist and an architect, I can quickly get ideas out of my head, and that is prime real estate for me. And the longer that to-do list gets built up of concepts and ideas, whatever it may be, architecture or art, the quicker I get it out, the more room I have for creativity is what I've noticed. And usually you get out with a quick hand sketch, but sometimes things need to be cooked a little bit more to fully get that idea out of your head. And then you maybe go back and develop it or do some other art with it. So just to give one great example that I like of a house that I worked on, we met with the family, and what was important to them boiled down to two things. Was our tradition. It was a very religious family. They came from a certain country where their traditions were different than the other communities, so community was very important. And for them, learning was a very important thing to their family, both academically and religiously. And I probably should have just showed just the roof tiles first, but I didn't know what to do with this project after we did the programmatic meeting with the client and went over how many bedrooms you need, bathrooms, what kind of kitchen, the appliances, and this and that. And it's just like these two words just kind of stuck out to me. And I was sitting somewhere, and I've looked at roof tiles a million times in my life, and I was just staring at the roof line, and I'm like, well, wait a second. That's a book. That's an open book. And then I started looking at different books in my office, and I just kept opening them up and laying them out. And I started seeing this similar profile of how roof tiles are meant, also merged with a open book, which is also key, that it's not a closed book. And this is the example, not the word concept, but just saying that that's the concept. Those three curves, that is the partie for this design. So this is my golden rule that I went back on throughout the whole development of the house, where then we started applying it to how are we organizing the spaces. Is it public? Is it private? And you're not actually going to see it so much. It's so subtle, but it's a core element throughout the design. And there's one curve, one curve, one curve. And it's just hugging it from there into a central courtyard that ties the entire house together. And this was the developed concept. Unfortunately, the house never got built. But it's one of my favorite from a design elements that I like telling the story. So you have to bear with me on that. And that was the middle. This is the rear of the house, and this is what it developed into an idea based off those two things. Again, this is what the front of the house is. And it doesn't scream, because at first when you saw the curves and the client was scared, like, oh, I don't really, that's too much. And then once we saw this, they're like, oh, you don't really feel it. I'm like, but you do as you walk through the house. It's very subtle, and that feeling is there, which can help remind you. Sorry, there's notifications happening. Try to stop that. That reminds you as you go from there. Okay, told you I promised I go back to basketball. Remember I said before, generational talent, there's always exceptions to the rule, and they might just be able to just naturally. There's still an exception to that rule. This is Victor Wembanyama. He was last year's #1 draft pick from France. It goes by Wemby. His nickname is the Alien. Why the Alien? No one has literally seen a talent like this man. And this man's young. He's in America, you go to college sports or developmental league, and then you go professional. In Europe, they go straight into a professional league. So he's already playing professionally, which is a leg up from a college experience. And when he came, literally everyone was saying this is the next generational talent. There's uncompared talent in this guy's fingertip compared to everybody else. He has spent every single day in every news article talking about his plans for future growth and learning. He is bringing in veterans to learn specific moves and styles. Again, going back to the past, looking at, okay, let's take the classical order of architecture and learn these rules. And it's not, and this is the key part, it's not that he's learning those to put in his toolbox to just play better. He has literally been quoted in saying he wants to use those things to do things no one's ever seen before. So he has to learn all of that stuff, and he is a great example of, this guy is the generational talent. I'm sure he'd also would be fine if he just kept doing what he was doing without the level of development, and he would still be a fine player, make a lot of money, and live a wonderful life. But this kid is so focused on the learning and the growth and the path that's really his key element. And yes, you might be a generational talent, but that doesn't excuse you from pushing yourself to keep learning and moving forward in life from there. So to sum it up, one of my favorite lines, and I'm going to focus more on the analogy. There was a Rabbi, Nachman of Breslov, lived in the late 1700s, which is interesting because it's like the same time period as George Washington. When you do these like lineups of people on different sides of the world and not knowing what time they were alive, it's very interesting. So one of his famous lines is, know that a person has to cross a very narrow bridge in this world, and the main thing is that he shouldn't fear. And it's something that keeps in mind in my personal life and in terms of the learning from the past and the future to inform a meaningful present. If you don't have the past and the future, you're stuck on an island by yourself, and it can get very lonely, and you can dry up very quickly on resources. You have to be connected in both directions. Now, it's narrow because it might feel like you're by yourself, but you're not. And the point is that if you look into the past and the future, you can keep growing and building that bridge as you go. and you have a direction to go on, and you can always constantly be building your bridge and making it stronger and working your way through life from there. But if you have one without the other, then you're trapped. And it's important to keep those roads open so that you can keep your journey going. And the important thing is, if you want to have a meaningful present, is to, and when I say past and future, and this is the whole point to boil it down, it means learning. So learning about your past, learning about the future. And that's the only way that, in my opinion, for your art and architecture, to create a meaningful present. And that's really the secret to having art in architecture or art in architecture. And I think for everybody's life, to have a meaningful present of where you are is to kind of have a view in both directions. And that is it. Thank you very much.